This process requires lots of practice. Try these three on your own. Really, do pause this video right now. Try these three on your own and then unpause the video and look at the answers and see if you're in good shape. If you didn't quite get them, you can follow through with the explanation I give. All right, let's do these. There's a common 3 in this first example, so I'm going to take it out first. So I'm going to get y squared positive y minus 6. Then I can factor the trinomial that's left into two binomials, y and y. If I take the negative 6 that was here after I factored the 3 out, using negative 1 and 6, negative 2 and 3, negative 2 and 3 are going to give me a positive 1, so I use those, and there's my factorization. I'll come back for the check in a minute. In the next example, 5x squared minus 40x plus 60, I've got a 5 in every term, so take it out first. Then factor the trinomial into two binomials. The 12 is now the constant, so factor that, 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. 2 and 6 add up to 8. We actually want negative 8. So remember, the other alternative, instead of two positives, to use two negatives. So those two negatives will add up to a negative 8. So now I can take and make this trinomial, factor it into two binomials, x and x, factor for the x squared, and then use the negative 2 and the negative 6. There's my factorization. I'll come back to the check in a minute. The next example, negative y to the fourth plus 12y cubed minus 35y squared, has a negative out front, so I definitely want to factor a negative, but it also has a y squared in common. So I'm going to take out both a negative and a y squared. When I do that, the first term I get y squared, the second term I get negative 12y, and the last term I get a positive 35. Now, that means I'm factoring a positive 35 because in my trinomial I'm left with a positive 35. So my binomial, to get my factors, I'm going to have a y and a y, and then that 35, we need two factors that add up to negative 12. Because they're adding up to a negative, I need two negatives. Negative 1, negative 35, negative 2 won't go in, negative 3 won't go in, negative 4, but negative 5 will go in, negative 7 times. Those two numbers add up to negative 12, so I use negative 5 and negative 7. I'll come back to the check later. Last example, there is an x in common in each of these terms. There's also a y in common, so I'm going to take an x and a y out. When I take it out of the first term, I get x squared. Out of the middle term, minus 2xy, and out of the last term, I have negative 3y squared left. So my xy stays out front. I'm going to have the product of two binomials. X squared goes to x and x. The y squared is going to go to the outside. It's going to pair up with factors of negative 3 that make the negative 2 in the middle. So negative 3 factors to negative 1 and 3. That's it, other than changing signs. Now this is going to add up to a positive 2. If I want it to add up to a negative 2, switch who's positive and who's negative. Those will add up to a negative 2. So I'm going to use a positive 1y. You don't have to put the 1. 1y is just y. And minus 3y. There's our factorization in the last example. At this point, you can go back and do the checks. The check, starting from this one, multiply the common factor through first, 3y minus 6. Then multiply that by 3y plus 3. FOIL that out, 3y squared plus 9y minus 6y minus 18. I've got the first and the last term correct. Adding up the middle, 9y minus 3y does get me to the middle of 3y where I started, so that checks. Again, 5 times x minus 2, 5x minus 10. Multiplied by x minus 6, FOIL that out, 5x squared minus 30x minus 10x plus 60. The middle terms do add up to negative 40x, and so we have negative or positive 5x squared minus 40x plus 60, which is exactly where we started. So that checks. Third example, checking this, distribute the negative y squared into the first binomial, negative y cubed minus, actually positive, two negatives make a positive, 5y squared. times y minus 7. Multiply that out by FOILing. Negative y to the fourth outside would be positive 7y cubed. Inside would be positive 5y cubed, and the last term would be negative 35y squared. These two middle terms are going to add up to a positive 12y cubed. That matches exactly what I started with, so that checks. My last example here, as a check, multiply the xy, the common, to the first binomial, x squared y plus xy squared. Then take that answer and multiply it to the last binomial, x minus 3y, and we get, by FOILing, x cubed y outside minus 3x squared y squared, inside positive x squared y squared, and last terms would be negative 3xy cubed. Looking at those terms, the first term matches the first term in the problem. The last term matches the last term in the problem. And the two middle ones, if I add them up, because they are like terms, do give me a negative 2x squared y squared. So that checks.